Produced by PI Media. Blockchain.
Hi, I'm Nate Nelson, and this is the Orbs Podcast. In this episode, why do consumer apps choose blockchain technology? Consider it a sort of introduction to the podcast at large. I'll be covering topics such as decentralized consensus and building through design partners, as well as speaking with a special guest.
So my name is Tao Cole. I'm the technical co-founder of Orbs.
Blockchain.
At the end of the last millennium, a revolutionary new technology changed the paradigm by which every business around the world could operate. The sudden introduction of this great opportunity and the border-destroying, platform-expanding effect it promised caused a lot of excitement. And then the bubble popped. We see stark similarities between the time we're living in now and the dot-com bubble of the late 90s. In that instance, companies from all walks jumped to take advantage of the new economic advantages afforded by network technology. All of the pomp and circumstance couldn't continue on forever, though, and many companies popped out of existence by 2001. Of course, those that didn't remain some of the most prominent and successful names to this day. Over the last decade, we've seen the birth of yet another new paradigm of computer systems infrastructure, one which, like the internet before it, requires us to rethink how and why we do things the way we do them. Like the internet, we can't even fully comprehend the extent of what could come of this new technological opportunity. And, like the internet before it, there's a lot of hype out there, not as much calm, reasoned engagement with the tech itself. It may be that we're now entering a sort of blockchain bubble. Last year, cryptocurrencies, particularly Bitcoin, rose aggressively in value. Now governments, banks, corporations, and individuals are all coming to engage with not just cryptocurrencies, but using its companion blockchain technology for other applications. This trend is only growing, and as is human nature, there will be some hard lessons learned along the way. So consumer app companies today have a new decision to make. Adopt blockchain early, opening themselves to the potential rewards of beating the rest of the market to the punch. Or stick to the ways of old, a comfortable place in the short term, but without the upside. Perhaps you're asking yourself at this point, why would any established company choose to abandon its ways, only to adopt an emerging, largely unexplored paradigm of operation? What's the saying? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Of course, that's what all the executives at companies who didn't adopt the internet were saying back in the 90s. In many cases, it's because these companies failed to adapt that they weren't able to survive. So when we look back decades from now, what will we say about those who rose and those who fell? How do we do our best to take advantage of emerging tech while avoiding the pitfalls of a potential bubble? Well, by using the lessons of the past to inform our decisions today. If the blockchain market does end up resembling the dot-com bubble, then perhaps the causes for success and failure for companies in the late 90s might also apply today. Drawing from historical knowledge, there are two principles that must be adhered to by consumer app companies approaching the blockchain space. Number one, avoid hype. Easy. Blockchain is exciting enough without giving into the temptations of press quotes, ICOs, and what your friend said you must buy into at a party last weekend. The goal isn't just to get attention in the market, but to create a sensible product oriented to the specific needs of real companies and real consumers. There are a number of tried and tested means of doing just that, without the need of being flashy about it. Here's Tal Cole.
I think it's more of a, state of mind to be requirement driven. That's something that I personally believe in. I have a lot of experience in building production systems in the real world and building startups and building companies, not necessarily in the blockchain space, but in other spaces. And the first thing you learn is that you need to meet the market early when you build any sort of product. And the reason for that, it has been established. We're not the first company building a product. And you meet the market early because usually you don't know exactly what you're building. You don't know what you're building. You maybe think who you're building it for, but you don't know what they need. So you meet your users, your customers early on, and you give them something that is kind of working, and you see what's not working. And then that's how you figure out how to build the next step. The process has to be iterative. And I think it has been demonstrated in 100 different fields so far in engineering that that's just the way to go. If a domain matures enough, then you start building iteratively with the customers. And I think the blockchain space has been behaving very differently up until now. Why? Because there are no customers. Not a lot of actual use. 6 million users altogether in blockchain. So how could you work with these companies until now that are actually using? If they don't exist, you can't. So what we see is, solutions being built, starting with a celebratory white paper. That's the basic thing you see. Like research in the academia. We've been researching for 3 years an algorithm, and we have this amazing algorithm, and now we're going to build a huge system around it and launch it. And after we finish development, after 2-3 years, now we're going to look for customers. Now, I don't think this is the way to go. I think that was the way the space started for obvious reasons, but I think that we should be more humble and not think that on the first day we know how to design a solution that these companies will actually use. We need to work with these companies, and to do that, we need design partners. So what are design partners? Design partners are the early adopters, these big companies that you aim for that are actually trying to build a product with it. And because you're giving them infrastructure, you need them to start building their apps on an infrastructure that doesn't work. And throughout this process, you see, okay, what is the biggest thing that is holding them back? And when you figure that out, you say, okay, I'll design my system to resolve this one thing. And then you give them another system that resolves the one thing that you've chosen, and they try to build on that. And then you see the next thing that they're being stuck on. And now you know your second thing that you need to develop, and then you work around that. And it's an iterative process that takes time, and it's different for every customer. So one of the tricky things is to figure out which design partners you want. On one hand, if you choose too many, you're going to have a general purpose solution. And there's nothing worse than a general purpose solution. That's just trying to do everything, and it's not succeeding in anything. So you want to be in a niche that you can optimize for, not take the lowest common denominator. But you don't want one or two design partners, because then you will end up creating a custom infrastructure solution that only they can use. So the trick here is to figure out your niche, being able to define yourself, and then finding those partners that are really trying to build something with this technology and are willing to do it with you. And I think they would gain a lot of value from this collaboration, because they would have a group of experts trying to build something that they can rely on. And of course, we learn a lot from this process as well.
Blockchain startups today would be well serviced by building on the experience of those Silicon Valley companies that came before. Today's industry leaders thrive not just for their superior product, but also for their sensible means of business and organization.
You have a company, you want to build an app, and let's say you have decided that blockchain is a technology for you. So I'm not going to go into why you've chosen the blockchain, but let's take it as a given. So now we need to think about developer experience. How do engineers in your company, how do product managers in your company build this app? And in this regard, I think that the product experience of solutions like AWS is great. I mean, it took them years upon years to perfect themselves to how businesses think. So I actually think that we should look towards these platforms and learn from them. Why? Because that's what businesses find working. So we'll try to take as much of the developer experience of these platforms and use it and try to translate it to this decentralized technology.
Principle number 2. Using blockchain not for the sake of it, but to build sensible, consumer-friendly platforms servicing regular people who may not know or care to know a thing about blockchain itself. Almost every other blockchain platform today requires a certain threshold of technical know-how before entry. Cryptocurrencies are a perfect example. A large majority of Bitcoin users, especially early adopters, are savvy in matters of blockchain, computer science, or at least value investing. Those communities are wonderful, but also necessarily limited. The fact is, regular people just don't have the time for, or just plain aren't interested in such technical matters. A mainstream product, one that could be used by any consumer or business leader out there in the world, must be able to take advantage of the blockchain format while lowering its technical barrier to entry, obfuscating all the nuts and bolts of the underlying machine, and streamlining the user experience to compete with other established market players.
For the people who are not blockchain literate, meaning that you're not an expert in blockchain, Orbs is infrastructure. And in this regard, Orbs is not very different from Amazon Web Services, AWS, or any other cloud infrastructure for creating apps. So let's say that you're a consumer company and you want to create an app. Let's say I have an instant messenger and I want to deploy my app to the cloud and run it on some servers. So I would use a cloud provider like Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, and so forth. So let's say that I wanted to write this app in a decentralized way on decentralized infrastructure. So I would use Orbs for that. So it's a platform infrastructure that allows me to write and deploy my apps, and it pretty much offers me compute services, storage services, and everything I need to run my apps on the cloud.
So, what kind of advantages can blockchain provide to a consumer brand? To answer this question, we need to understand the concept of decentralized consensus, no less than the idea that blockchain is built upon. You already know of and are quite used to centralized systems. It's when a single entity controls a system, as for instance, air traffic control is to air travel. Decentralized systems are comprised of a group of independent but equally privileged nodes operating on local information to accomplish global goals. These systems lack a central controller that exercises governance, supervision, and control over the system, thus allowing power to be distributed over the network. Taxis are a good example of a decentralized system. If you've ever been to New York City, you know that they don't exactly run in a coordinated fashion. Consensus is a shared view of reality that is agreed upon by different parts of a system. Per our analogy, take a person waiting for a cab on a street corner in Midtown Manhattan. One cab driver notices the person and decides to pick them up. Another cab driver doesn't notice the first cab driver and also goes to pick up that same person. When both cabs pull up to the same corner, we have an error. At best, one cab driver's time is wasted. At worst, the drivers get into an argument and have to compete for the business, leaving the passenger having to awkwardly choose between the two, as if it matters. Of course, with a centralized system like Uber, consensus is an afterthought. As a singular body, the app dictates the system to all other parties involved. Because shared reality is subject to all parties equally in a decentralized space, it is more complicated to achieve, but also more democratic, taking the power out of the hands of corporate giants. We'll talk later in the season about how blockchain environments account for the sorts of errors that can come when two agents, like taxis, record separate accounts of the same event, picking up a passenger. Ultimately, What's important is that decentralized consensus provides equality of all nodes without descending into chaos. One node can't simply go rogue and decide on its own rules. Instead, every node represents an equally small share of that overall governing structure. Taxis get their business, pedestrians get their rides, and nobody has to direct it all from the top down. Naturally, an environment where all players get equal vote is one which encourages separate parties to band together. Cryptocurrencies are a great example of this. Say one malicious actor attempts to steal a large amount of money by breaking a cryptocurrency infrastructure to pour into his or her own pocket. In such a scenario, all other nodes would lose trust in the security of the system, rendering everyone's money, including the robbers, null. Therefore, the separate nodes of a cryptocurrency network have an inherent incentive to cooperate and make their shared network more resilient to malicious activity. For broader blockchain platforms, the cooperation inherently encouraged by decentralization provides solution to one of the great pitfalls of marketplaces under free market capitalism. We all know of the tendency of marketplaces to become consolidated in the hands of the few. In the case of the internet, giants like Google, Amazon, and Facebook, at the necessary expense of smaller players. Since it's unrealistic that a single entity could comprise a majority of a decentralized network, it's essentially guaranteed that no single entity will be able to leverage themselves to skew the balance of power in their favor, as, say, occurs otherwise today between corporate giants and governments. One practical example of what could come of decentralized infrastructure is the power to build programmable economies, where equal players within an ecosystem bind together to create an economy best fit to all their individual needs. A similar process could apply to different application platforms, redesigning their shared environment to foster greater cross-party communication and value transfer. How can we create such handcrafted economies where consumer apps can monetize effectively? The solution is what is known as tokens. In the digital world, tokens are standard units of value that can be transferred between nodes in the network. Tokenization provides a seamless means of creating and designing controlled economic environments. Tokens are immune to many of the drawbacks that fiat currencies face in the digital setting. Tokens can be shared instantaneously across borders, removing the need for separate payment solutions per geography. Businesses can receive tokens directly with minimal integration, cutting out middlemen such as payment providers and the hefty fees that they charge. Tokens are easier to secure, reducing fees that are traditionally high to offset chargebacks and fraud. Tokens are also well suited for flexible payment models, such as microtransactions, and can be incorporated seamlessly into larger systems through their programmable interfaces. Using tokens, apps can open themselves to new types of revenue streams, rather than simply resorting to the selling of attention and data from their customers to advertisers and marketers, which has classically resulted in advantages almost exclusively for the largest applications, concentrating wealth and power in the hands of the few. Adopting decentralization requires a shift in understanding about how apps can run, how priorities and resources can be allocated, and how companies can cooperate within larger marketplaces. It's a tall task, yes, but as we've said, brands looking to be leaders of tomorrow need to embrace new tech today and learn from real-world use cases to build smartly. For those willing to reconsider the conventions of old, the possibilities have no bounds. In our next podcast episode, we'll cover the basic technical concepts and terminology you need to understand blockchain technology. I'm Nate Nelson. That and more to come on the Orbs podcast.
Blockchain. Produced by PI Media.